Adebayo Okafor sat in silence as his mother's words echoed in his mind. The lush interior of his family compound in Ikoyi still carried the tension of their conversation. A man without an heir is like a tree without roots, Mama Okafor had said, her voice firm despite her advancing years. She had summoned him for Sunday lunch only to lecture him again. "You are 42, Adebayo. Your father had 3 sons by the time he was your age. When will you stop focusing only on business and remember your duty to our lineage?" The memory of her disappointment followed him into the back of his Mercedes as his driver navigated the busy streets of Lagos Central. His mother didn't understand the complexity of his situation. His first marriage to Falake had been a disaster, a woman who had seen him only as access to wealth and status. She had spent his money lavishly while giving nothing of herself to their relationship. And then there was Ngozi, his second wife. The betrayal still stung, finding her with Pastor Emmanuel, the very man who had counseled them on their marriage. The scandal had been carefully contained with money and influence, but the wound remained raw. 2 failed marriages is enough, he muttered to himself as the car slowed in the notorious Lagos traffic. I cannot go through that again. As the Mercedes inched forward, Adebayo looked out at the bustling city, a metropolis of contrasts where gleaming skyscrapers cast shadows over crowded markets. Through the tinted window, he observed the people rushing by, businessmen in suits, market women with colorful headscarves, children in school uniforms. Then he saw her, a thin woman crouched near a roadside stall, carefully sorting through discarded vegetables from the market. There was something in her demeanor that caught his attention, a quiet dignity despite her circumstances. She wasn't begging or looking for pity, she was surviving. "Stop the car," Adebayo commanded suddenly. "Sir?" his driver questioned, surprised by the abrupt order. "Pull over, Musa, right here." As the car eased to the curb, Adebayo watched the woman more closely. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps in her late 20s. Her clothes were worn but clean, her movements purposeful and determined. A thought formed in his mind, outrageous, unprecedented, yet somehow perfect in its simplicity. He needed an heir without the complications of marriage. Here was someone who needed an opportunity. "Wait here," he told his driver as he stepped out of the air-conditioned comfort of the Mercedes into the humid Lagos air. The woman looked up, startled by his approach. Wariness filled her eyes as she recognized the expensive suit, the luxury watch, the air of authority that surrounded him. "Hello," Adebayo said, his voice gentler than his usual business tone. "What is your name?" "Amara," she replied cautiously, straightening up to face him. Despite her circumstances, she met his gaze directly. No cowering, no false deference. "Amara, I am Adebayo Okafor. May I speak with you for a moment?" Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What do you want from me?" "Just a conversation," he assured her. "I have a proposition that might interest you." "What kind of proposition would a man like you have for a woman like me?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge of caution born from hard-earned street wisdom. Adebayo glanced around at the busy street. "Not here. Could we go somewhere more private to talk? That cafe, perhaps?" He pointed to a small establishment across the road. Amara hesitated, studying him. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," he answered honestly. "But I'm offering you a chance to hear me out. Nothing more for now." After a long moment, curiosity seemed to win over caution. "All right, but we stay in public." As they crossed the road together, the billionaire and the market woman, Adebayo felt the stares of passers-by. He was used to attention, but not this kind. For once, he didn't care what others thought. Inside the cafe, over cups of steaming tea, Adebayo explained his unusual proposal. He watched as Amar's expression shifted from disbelief to consideration. "Why me?" she asked finally, her hands wrapped around the chipped teacup. "Because you have strength," he said simply. "I've seen how you survive. You have determination and dignity. These are qualities I want my child to inherit. And what do I get from this arrangement?" Her question was direct, pragmatic. "Financial security, a good home, the best medical care, and," he paused, A chance for a better life. Amara sat back, studying him. "I'll need your number," she said finally. "I need to think about this." Adebayo handed her his business card with his private number written on the back. As their fingers brushed, he felt a strange connection. Not romantic, but something equally powerful. A potential partnership that could change both their lives. Later that night, as he stood at the edge of his glass-walled office on the 40th floor looking out at Lagos Central, his phone rang. "Hello?" Amara's voice sounded tired but resolved. "You've made a decision?" he asked, his heart beating faster than it did during his biggest business deals. "I have questions first," she countered. "Many questions." "Of course," he agreed, turning away from the window and the glittering cityscape below. As they talked, Adebayo felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond wealth accumulation, a chance to create something meaningful. His mother wanted an heir, but perhaps he was finding something more valuable, a new definition of family. "I'll consider it," Amara said finally, before ending the call. Adebayo couldn't sleep that night. He paced his penthouse thinking about his father's harsh expectations, his mother's traditional demands, the empty halls of his childhood home. He wanted something different for his child: warmth, acceptance, love without conditions. By morning, he had made up his mind. This wouldn't just be a business transaction. He would try to do better, to create something more meaningful. He would meet with Amara again and make her understand that this could be more than just money changing hands. For the first time in years, Adebayo felt something like hope. Amara sat on an overturned plastic crate behind Oyingbo Market, counting the meager earnings from the day's work. The morning haze had given way to the harsh afternoon sun, and sweat beaded on her forehead as she carefully separated the notes and coins. 2,000 naira for a full day of sorting through leftover vegetables that the market women allowed her to resell. Not enough. Never enough. She glanced at the business card in her hand, heavy cardstock with gold lettering that caught the sunlight. Adebayo Okafor, CEO, Okafor Holdings Limited. His private number was scrawled on the back in confident handwriting. 3 days had passed since their strange meeting in the cafe. 3 days of turning his proposition over in her mind, examining it from every angle like one of the bruised tomatoes she salvaged from the market waste. A surrogate, she whispered to herself, testing the word. The mother of his child? It wasn't what she had dreamed of when she left her village 5 years ago. Back then, her ambitions had been simple but clear. Save enough money to rent her own market stall, build a small business selling fabrics, and eventually bring her younger sister to the city for a better education. But Lagos had proven harsher than she expected. Opportunities scarcer, expenses higher. Now her dreams had narrowed to mere survival, with that market stall seeming as distant as the moon. Until this man, this billionaire, had stepped from his luxury car with his unbelievable proposal. "You're not seriously considering it, are you?" her friend Blessing had asked when Amara confided in her. "Men like that don't help women like us without wanting something terrible in return." But what Adebayo wanted, he had stated plainly: a child without the entanglements of marriage or romance. A business arrangement with clear terms. Amara slipped the business card back into the hidden pocket she had sewn into her wrapper. She gathered her few remaining vegetables and began the long walk to the small room she shared with the 2 other women on the outskirts of the city. As she walked, she passed a row of proper market stalls, the kind she had dreamed of owning. Women sat proudly behind their wares, calling to customers, negotiating prices with confidence. They had what she wanted: independence, stability, dignity in their work. "With his money, I could have my own stall," she murmured. "Not just one, but several. Perhaps even a proper shop someday." The thought was tantalizing, almost dizzying in its possibility. By the time she reached her shared room, night had fallen. Her roommates were already asleep, exhausted from their own struggles to survive in the unforgiving city. In the dim light of a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, Amara took out the business card again and dialed the number. To her surprise, he answered immediately. "Amara," he said, as if he had been expecting her call at exactly this moment. "Mr. Okafor?" she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I've been thinking about your proposal." "And?" "I have conditions," she said firmly, surprising herself with her boldness. There was a pause, then a chuckle that sounded almost like respect. "I'm listening. I want to own my own business, a fabric stall in Belogan Market to start with. Not just after the baby is born, but before. I want to establish myself now." "That can be arranged," he said without hesitation. "And I want to be part of the child's life, not just as a surrogate, but as a mother. I won't give birth to a baby and then be dismissed." This time the pause was longer. "That complicates things. I hadn't planned." "Those are my terms," Amara interrupted, heart pounding but voice firm. "Take them or find someone else." The silence stretched between them. Amara held her breath, wondering if she had pushed too far. "Very well," he finally said. "We'll discuss the details in person. Can you meet me tomorrow?" "Yes," she agreed, "but not in a cafe this time. I want to see where this child would live. I want to see your world before I agree to anything." Another pause, then, "I'll send a car for you at noon." The next day, a sleek black Mercedes arrived at the corner near her rented room. The driver, a respectful man named Musa, opened the door for her as if she were a woman of importance. The ride to Victoria Island was like traveling to another country. From the crowded, chaotic streets of her neighborhood to the manicured avenues lined with mansions and high-rise buildings. When they arrived at Adebayo's penthouse, Amara's determination nearly faltered. Standing in the private elevator that rose silently to the 40th floor, she felt the enormity of what she was considering. What did she, a market woman with barely enough education, have to offer a child who would be born into such privilege? But when the doors opened and she saw Adebayo standing there, powerful yet somehow uncertain in his own home, her resolve returned. He might have wealth, but she had something he needed just as desperately. "Welcome, Amara," he said, gesturing her inside. She stepped into a vast living room with glass walls that revealed a breathtaking view of Lagos. For a moment, she simply stared at the endless horizon, the city spread out like a tapestry below. "This is where the child would grow up?" she asked, turning back to him. "Yes," he confirmed. "With every advantage, every opportunity." "Including a mother?" she pressed. Adebayo's expression tightened momentarily, then relaxed into something like resignation. "Including a mother," he agreed. "But there would need to be clear boundaries, clear expectations." "As there should be," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I do not expect romance, Mr. Okafor. I don't want to be your wife, but I will not be separated from my child." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are not what I expected, Amara." "Neither are you," she admitted. "I thought you would be colder." A shadow fell over his face. "My first wife was interested only in my money. My second betrayed me with a man of God. Coldness becomes a necessary shield." "And yet you want a child," she observed. "Children require warmth." "Yes," he said softly. "They do." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with the gravity of what they were considering. "If I say yes," Amara finally asked, "what happens next?" "We formalize the agreement. You get your market stall. We consult with doctors. And then—" He gestured vaguely, seemingly at a loss for the clinical words. "And then we create a life," she finished for him. "Not just for the child, but perhaps for ourselves as well." Adebayo looked surprised at her framing, but didn't disagree. Amara walked to the window, placing her palm against the cool glass as she gazed out at Lagos. Somewhere out there was the life she had been struggling to build. With one word, she could change everything, for better or worse. "I'll do it," she said firmly, turning back to face him. "I accept your proposal." Relief and gratitude flickered across Adebayo's face. In that moment, standing in that luxurious penthouse so far above the streets where she had struggled, something unexpected began to form between them, a fragile connection built on shared hope and unspoken fears. Neither of them could have predicted how this arrangement would transform them both in the months to come. Adebayo chose Echo Gardens, an upscale restaurant in Lagos Central, for their first formal meeting. Traditional carved wooden chandeliers hung from high ceilings, casting warm light over polished tables inlaid with kente patterns. He watched Amara enter, noticing how she hesitated at the door, clearly uncomfortable in such a lavish setting. She wore a simple Ankara dress, her hair neatly wrapped in a modest gel, but lacking the elaborate styling of the other women in the room. Despite this, she walked with dignity as she approached his table. "Adebayo," she greeted him, her voice steady. "Amara, please sit down." He gestured to the chair across from him, offering a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. As she sat, Adebayo noticed her taking in the carved wooden chairs, the fine china, the crystal glasses, all signs of a world she'd never belonged to. The waiter approached, and Adebayo ordered for both of them with practiced ease, selecting traditional dishes prepared with modern flair. "Let's discuss the terms," he said, leaning forward. "I want to be clear about what this arrangement involves." Amara nodded. "I understand, but I need to know exactly what you expect from me beyond just carrying the child." Adebayo's expression hardened slightly. "I expect you to take care of yourself. Proper nutrition, regular checkups, no risks to the baby's health. I'll cover all expenses, of course." "And what about my role after the birth?" Amara asked directly. "I won't just be a vessel for your heir, Adebayo. In our culture, a child belongs to more than just one person. I need to be involved in my child's life." "I'm paying you for a service," he replied, his business instincts taking over. "I have specific plans for my legacy." Amara's eyes flashed. "Your legacy? We're talking about a human being, not a trophy. Our ancestors would frown upon such thinking." Adebayo leaned back, crossing his arms. The tension between them was palpable. "I understand that, but you must realize, my world demands perfection. I cannot afford complications." "And what if the child isn't perfect?" Amara challenged. "What if they have special needs or disabilities? Will you reject them as some do in our society, despite our traditional values of community care?" The question hung in the air. Adebayo hadn't considered this possibility, and it unsettled him. After a moment, he answered more softly, "Then I will learn to accept that. I'm not asking for just a transaction, Amara. I want a partnership." His sincerity surprised her. She had expected a ruthless businessman, but here was a glimpse of something more human. "What if I say yes?" she asked. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, his gaze steady. "I want what's best for the child, and for you." Amara felt a spark of hope ignite within her. This was more than a financial arrangement. It could be the start of something meaningful. "All right," she said finally, "I'll do it." Adebayo's expression softened, showing genuine gratitude. In that moment, amid the restaurant's quiet conversation and the distant sounds of traditional Afrobeat music, a fragile connection formed between them. Unexpected, but full of possibility. 9 months after signing the contract, Amara lay in a private suite at Lagos Central Medical Center. The room, with its advanced equipment and luxurious furnishings, was worlds away from the local clinic where most women from her background delivered their babies. Despite their arrangement beginning as a business transaction, things had evolved during the pregnancy. Adebayo had insisted Amara move into the penthouse during her 4th month, concerned about her health after finding her working long hours at her new fabric stall in Balogan Market. Their initial awkwardness had gradually given way to a cautious friendship as they prepared for the child's arrival. Now, as contractions intensified, Amara gripped the bedsheets, her face contorted in pain. Adebayo stood nearby, looking uncharacteristically helpless. For a man accustomed to controlling everything in his world, this situation left him powerless. "You're doing wonderfully," Dr. Namdi encouraged. "The baby is almost here. One more push." With a final, powerful cry, Amara delivered their child into the world. The moment felt surreal to both of them. After months of preparation, their lives had changed forever. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the infant on Amara's chest. Adebayo moved closer, eager to see his daughter. As he looked down at the infant, something caught his attention. The baby's eyes seemed unfocused, cloudy. "Is something wrong with her eyes?" he asked, voice tight with sudden concern. Dr. Namdi examined the baby carefully, then looked up with a solemn expression. "She appears to have congenital cataracts. It's likely she's blind. We'll need to run tests, but otherwise, she seems healthy." The room fell silent except for the infant's soft cries. Adebayo stepped back, his expression unreadable. This wasn't part of his plan. His perfect air had an imperfection. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Mama Okafor, who swept into the room with regal authority, her elaborate head wrap and expensive lace gel announcing her status. "Let me see my grandchild," she demanded, barely acknowledging Amara with a curt nod. As she peered at the baby, her expression shifted from anticipation to horror. "What is wrong with her eyes?" she whispered harshly. "The doctor says she has cataracts, Mama. She's blind," Adebayo explained quietly. Mama Okafor stepped back, making a quick sign with her fingers to ward off evil. "This is not natural," she hissed. "This child is cursed. It's because of this arrangement. You went against tradition, against the proper way of doing things." "Mama, please," Adebayo warned, glancing worriedly at Amara. "Don't you see?" his mother continued. "This is punishment from the ancestors. A blind child cannot carry your legacy." Amara, despite her exhaustion, spoke up firmly. "With respect, Mama Okafor, this child is not cursed. She is different, not less. In many villages, children like her are believed to have special sight. They see with their spirits what we cannot see with our eyes." "Market woman superstitions," Mama Okafor dismissed. "No," Amara countered, her voice quiet but strong. "Ancient wisdom that you've forgotten in your big houses and fancy cars." Tension filled the room until Adebayo finally spoke. "Mama, this is my daughter, your granddaughter. She needs your blessing, not your judgment." Mama Okafor stared at her son, shocked by his defiance. Without another word, she turned and left the room. Amara looked down at their daughter with fierce protectiveness. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She may not see the world as we do, but she'll experience it in her own special way." Slowly, Adebayo approached the bed again. He reached out hesitantly, touching his daughter's tiny hand. To his surprise, she instinctively curled her fingers around his. "She knows you're her father," Amara said. "She feels your presence." Something shifted in Adebayo's expression, the shock and disappointment giving way to a more complex emotion. "What shall we name her?" he asked quietly. "Olufemi," Amara suggested. "God loves me, because despite everything, she is loved." Adebayo nodded, his voice thick with emotion as he repeated, "Olufemi." As they sat together in that hospital room, the three of them connected by circumstance and now by something deeper, Adebayo realized that his definition of legacy was changing. This child, unexpected and imperfect by society's standards, was already teaching him to see beyond his narrow vision of success. "We'll face this together," he promised, meeting Amara's eyes with newfound resolution. As we agreed. Adebayo paced the nursery floor, his footsteps silent on the hand-woven kente rug. The room was a showcase of luxury. Hand-painted murals of Nigerian folk tales on the walls, a custom-made mahogany crib carved by master craftsmen from Benin, toys from around the continent. Everything perfect, except for one thing. His daughter couldn't see any of it. He glanced at the crib where the baby slept peacefully. They had named her Olufemi, meaning God loves me, a name Amara had suggested, saying it represented divine blessing and protection. The irony wasn't lost on Adebayo. Divine blessings were exactly what he feared now. "Adebayo?" Amara's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, watching him with concern. "You're worried about tomorrow, aren't you?" Tomorrow? The board meeting where he was supposed to present his heir to his business associates. They expected perfection, a carbon copy of Adebayo himself. Instead, he had a blind daughter whose future was uncertain. "How can I face them?" he asked, frustration evident in his voice. "The board is expecting an announcement, a celebration. They want to see success." Amara entered the room, her simple Ankara dress a stark contrast to the nursery's opulence. "What does success mean to you, Adebayo? Is it what others think, or is it something more?" Our ancestors measured wealth not by possessions but by the strength of one's character and community. He shook his head. You don't understand. I've built everything on being the best. How can I present her to the world when she doesn't fit their expectations? She is perfect in her own way, Amara said softly, moving to the crib and gently touching Olufemi's cheek. The world may judge her for what she lacks, but we know her strength. In many villages, children like her are believed to have special connections to the spirit world. She will teach us things we never expected to learn. Adebayo's heart ached at her words. Part of him wanted to believe her, to embrace this new reality, but the fear of judgment was overwhelming. What will they say, Amara? What will they think of me? Let them think what they want, she replied, her voice kind but firm. You cannot control how others see her, but you can shape her world. You can be the father she needs, not the one the world expects. Remember what our elders say, it takes a village to raise a child. We will be her village. The tension in the room was palpable. Adebayo felt trapped between the man he had been and the man he needed to become. You make it sound so easy, he said, his voice tight with emotion. It's not easy, Amara admitted, but it's worth it. You have the power to change things, Adebayo. Don't let fear stop you from loving your daughter completely. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Adebayo saw the truth in her words. He was terrified, not just of others' judgment, but of his own inadequacy. Could he truly be what Olufemi needed? I don't want to fail her, he whispered, vulnerability creeping into his voice. You won't, Amara assured him, stepping closer. Not if you let love guide you. We're in this together, Adebayo. We'll face the chaos and uncertainty as a family, just as our ancestors have done for generations. As he looked into Amara's earnest eyes, something shifted within him. Perhaps there was a way forward. Not the path he had planned, but one that might lead to something even more meaningful. The soft glow of a sunset filtered through the windows of Adebayo's study, where he sat with his uncle, Chief Emeka. As the eldest brother of Adebayo's late father, Chief Emeka held a position of respect in the family, his wisdom often sought during difficult times. You've barely touched your palm wine, Chief Emeka observed, gesturing to the traditional calabash in front of Adebayo. Something troubles you, my son. Adebayo sighed, running his hand over his face. I'm struggling, uncle. The baby. I don't know how to connect with her. Chief Emeka nodded thoughtfully. The blind child. Olufemi, Adebayo corrected gently. Her name is Olufemi. Olufemi, his uncle repeated with a small smile. A good name. God loves her indeed. He leaned forward. Tell me why you struggle. Adebayo stared out the window, gathering his thoughts. She can't see me, uncle. How do I be a father to a child who won't ever know what I look like? When I hold her, she cries. When Amara holds her, she settles instantly. Ah, Chief Emeka chuckled. So, it is not just the blindness that troubles you, but also a father's jealousy of a mother's natural bond. It's not jealousy, Adebayo protested. It's inadequacy. I've built an empire, uncle. I can close million-naira deals without breaking a sweat, but I can't comfort my own daughter. Chief Emeka took a slow sip of palm wine. When your father was alive, did he ever tell you about your cousin Tunde? No, Adebayo replied, confused by the change in subject. Tunde was born deaf. Your grandfather wanted to send him away to a special school far from the family, but your grandmother refused. The old man's eyes grew distant with memory. She said, the child doesn't need to be fixed. We need to learn a new language. She learned to speak with her hands, and she taught the entire household. Chief Emeka fixed Adebayo with a penetrating gaze. Your child doesn't need to see you with her eyes to know you. She needs to feel you with her heart. You must learn a new language, Adebayo. The language of touch, of presence, of patience. But how? Adebayo asked, frustration evident in his voice. Business, I understand. This fatherhood to a special child, I have no blueprint for this. When was the last time you held her? Chief Emeka asked. This morning. She cried until Amara took her. And how did you hold her? Adebayo demonstrated, his arms stiff, his posture formal. Chief Emeka laughed. "You hold her like a business proposal. No wonder she cries." The older man set down his drink. "Come, let us go to your daughter now." Reluctantly, Adebayo led his uncle to the nursery where Amara sat singing softly to Olufemi. She looked up in surprise when the men entered. "Chief Emeka wants to see Olufemi," Adebayo explained. Amara stood respectfully, offering the baby to the elder. Chief Emeka took Olufemi with practiced ease, cradling her close to his chest, speaking to her in soft, melodic tones. The baby, remarkably, remained calm. "You see?" Chief Emeka said to Adebayo. "She feels my heart beating. She hears the rumble of my voice in my chest. She feels safe." He transferred the baby gently to Adebayo's arms, adjusting his nephew's rigid posture. "Hold her close. Let her feel your warmth. Speak to her, not as CEO Okafor, but as Baba." Nervously, Adebayo held his daughter against his chest, her tiny head tucked under his chin. To his surprise, she remained calm, her little hand grasping at his shirt. "Talk to her," Chief Emeka encouraged. Olufemi," Adebayo began awkwardly. "I am your father." As he continued to speak, his voice softened, became more natural. The baby responded, settling comfortably in his arms. Chief Emeka smiled at Amara, who watched with glistening eyes. "Sometimes," the old man said quietly, "the greatest business minds need the simplest lessons." As Adebayo held his daughter, feeling her heart beat against his own, something shifted within him. This connection, fragile but real, was worth more than any deal he'd ever closed. "Thank you, Uncle," he whispered, not taking his eyes off Olufemi. Chief Emeka nodded, satisfied. "Remember, Adebayo, in our tradition, we say a child belongs to many. Not just the parents, but the ancestors, the community, the future. You are not alone in this journey." For the first time since Olufemi's birth, Adebayo felt truly capable of being her father. Not perfect, perhaps, but present and learning. As the evening light faded from the nursery, the four of them formed a tableau of an unlikely family coming together, finding strength in their differences. Adebayo stood on his penthouse balcony, watching the sunset paint Lagos Central with golden light. For years, this view had been his comfort, proof of all he had achieved. Now, it felt like a reminder of the two worlds he was trying to bridge. Inside, he heard Amara laughing with Olufemi, their joyful sounds drawing him back in. He found them on the living room floor, Amara helping Olufemi feel different textures, smooth calabash, rough raffia, soft Adair cloth. "Come join us," Amara called, her eyes bright with happiness. Adebayo hesitated, thinking of the business calls he should return, but Olufemi's giggles pulled him in. He sat down beside them, watching as his daughter explored the world through touch. "Watch this," Amara said, gently placing Olufemi on her back. The baby kicked her legs excitedly, squealing with delight as Amara recited a traditional Igbo counting rhyme, tapping each of the child's toes in turn. Adebayo smiled, momentarily forgetting his worries. But his phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder of the world outside, of colleagues who were beginning to gossip about his unusual family situation. "You're worried about what they think, aren't you?" Amara asked, noticing the change in his expression. "They don't understand," Adebayo admitted. "They see us as a scandal, not a family. In business circles, people talk." "And what do you see?" Amara challenged. "Are you ashamed of us?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. Adebayo tensed. He recognized the sound of his elite social circle coming to confront him. "Stay here," he said, rising to answer the door. When he opened it, his former friends stood there, their expressions a mix of concern and judgment. Among them was Chijioke, the chairman of his board, and his wife Ngozi, both dressed impeccably in designer traditional attire. "Adebayo, this has gone far enough," Ngozi declared, her gold jewelry jangling as she slammed her palm on his mahogany desk. Her eyes flashed with indignation. "Your arrangement with this market woman isn't just your personal scandal anymore. Our shareholders are threatening to pull out. The board is in an uproar." "Lower your voice," Adebayo replied, his calm exterior masking the rage building within him. "Why should I?" Ngosi's voice rose even higher. "Have you lost your mind? First you bring a beggar into your home, then you parade around a blind child as your heir? The Okafor name is becoming a laughingstock." Adebayo rose slowly from his chair, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the room. "That beggar and that blind child have names. They are Amara and Olufemi. They are my family." "Family?" Chijioke scoffed, stepping forward. "Is that what you call this? Your father would be ashamed. He built a dynasty, and you're destroying it for what? Some misplaced guilt? A charity case?" The vein in Adebayo's temple throbbed visibly. "Choose your next words carefully, Chijioke." "No, you need to hear this." Chijioke pressed on, oblivious to the danger in Adebayo's eyes. "The Emirates contract is hanging by a thread. Minister Obasanjo withdrew his support yesterday. And for what? A street woman who—" Adebayo's fist came down on the desk with such force that the crystal paperweight jumped and crashed to the floor, shattering like ice. The room fell instantly silent. "Her name is Amara," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "She was selling discarded vegetables when I met her, yet she has more dignity in her fingertips than anyone in this room. And my daughter, yes, my daughter, may be blind, but she sees more truth than any of you ever will." "Adebayo," Ngozi began, her tone suddenly placating. "No," he thundered. "You come into my home, disrespect my family, and expect me to what? Apologize? Cast them out? For the sake of your comfort? For money?" He stepped around the desk, advancing on his visitors until they instinctively backed away. "You think you know me because we've done business together? You know nothing. Amara has taught me what it means to truly see. Beyond wealth, beyond status, beyond the superficial values this city worships." The door opened quietly, and Amara stood there, her simple dignity in stark contrast to Ngozi's ostentatious display of wealth. The room fell silent as she entered, her calm presence somehow more commanding than all the shouting that had preceded her. "The baby is sleeping," she said simply, her eyes meeting Adebayo's with silent support. Something in Adebayo's posture changed, his rage channeling into resolute strength. "My family isn't up for debate or approval," he said, turning back to his unwelcome guests. "If my happiness costs me your friendship, my daughter costs me contracts, or my choice of partner costs me investors, then I count it all as profit." The shock on their faces turned to discomfort as they realized the man before them was not the Adebayo they thought they knew. This was someone new, someone who had found something worth more than all his wealth. "I think you should leave," he said, not as a suggestion, but a command. As they filed out, they murmured, "He has been bewitched." Chijioke paused at the door. "You're making a mistake that will cost you everything." Adebayo smiled, reaching for Amara's hand. "No, for the first time in my life I'm not making a mistake. I have not been bewitched and I've found everything." When the door closed behind them, Adebayo felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The battle lines had been drawn. He had chosen his side. As the door closed behind them, Amara touched Adebayo's arm gently. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of his old life, Adebayo knew he had made the right choice. The path forward might not be easy, but with Amara and Olufemi, he had found something far more valuable than social approval. He had found a family worth fighting for. The morning after the confrontation with his former colleagues, Adebayo woke to find Amara's side of the bed empty. He had recently invited her to move from the guest quarters into his room, their relationship evolving beyond their original arrangement. Concerned, he called out her name but received no answer. When he opened the door to the nursery, he found Amara slumped in the rocking chair beside Olufemi's crib, her face flushed with fever, breathing labored. "Amara!" He rushed to her side, alarmed by the heat radiating from her skin when he touched her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. "Adebayo? I don't feel well," she whispered. "I tried to get up for Olufemi's morning feed, but I couldn't." Panic surged through him. He reached for his phone and called Dr. Nanamdi, their family doctor who had been caring for both Amara and Olufemi since the birth. "She needs immediate medical attention," Dr. Nanamdi said after hearing the symptoms. "I'm sending paramedics now. This could be severe malaria or typhoid, possibly related to her immune system being compromised from her previous living conditions." Adebayo stayed by Amara's side, holding her hand and whispering reassurances until the doorbell rang. As he went to answer it, he realized with startling clarity that the investor meeting scheduled for that morning, once the focus of his world, now seemed trivial compared to Amara's health. When Adebayo opened the door, the paramedic Dr. Namdi had sent stood there, his uniform crisp and professional. "Mr. Okafor?" he asked. "I'm here for Amara. Dr. Namdi briefed us on her condition." Adebayo nodded, anxiety tightening his chest. "She's in the nursery. This way." He led the paramedic through the penthouse, past the untouched breakfast that Bisi, their house help, had prepared. In the nursery, Amara was trying to stand, her movements weak and uncoordinated. "I need to help with Olufemi's breakfast," she mumbled, clearly disoriented. "Olufemi's fine," Adebayo assured her. "Bisi is with her." The paramedic quickly assessed Amara, his expression growing more concerned. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately. Her fever is dangerously high and she's showing signs of severe infection." "Hospital?" Amara protested weakly. "No, Adebayo has his meeting with the Niger Delta investors." "I'm coming with you," Adebayo said firmly, his protective instincts overriding everything else. "The meeting doesn't matter. You do." He called his assistant from the ambulance, canceling the investor meeting without hesitation or regret. As they sped toward the hospital, Adebayo held Amara's hand, terrified by how small and fragile it felt in his. At the hospital, Adebayo paced the waiting room, his mind racing with fears he'd never allowed himself to acknowledge before. The thought of losing Amara, of Olufemi growing up without her mother, made his chest tight with panic. He barely noticed when his phone rang repeatedly. Likely the investors he'd stood up. When Dr. Namdi finally appeared, Adebayo rushed forward. "Mr. Okafor, Amara has severe typhoid fever," the doctor explained. "We've started treatment with antibiotics and she should recover, but she'll need rest and care. It's fortunate you brought her in quickly." Relief flooded through him. He hurried to Amara's room, finding her propped up in bed, looking exhausted but alive. "You scared me," he admitted, taking her hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to worry you before your big meeting with the oil investors." Adebayo shook his head, suddenly clear about what mattered. "The meeting doesn't matter. You do. You and Olufemi are what's important." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "When did you become so wise?" "I had a good teacher," he replied, squeezing her hand. "As our elders say, wealth, if you use it, comes to an end. Learning, if you use it, increases." His phone buzzed again. The investors were still trying to reach him. Adebayo glanced at the screen, then silenced it completely. "That's your big investor call, isn't it?" Amara asked, her voice weak but concerned. "Yes," Adebayo admitted, "but it doesn't matter now. This is where I need to be." As he sat by Amara's bedside, Adebayo realized how much had changed. 6 months ago, he would have chosen business over everything. Now he understood that real wealth wasn't measured in naira or deals, but in the connections we forge and the love we give. "I'm not leaving," he promised, brushing hair from her forehead. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Amara smiled weakly, her eyes showing her gratitude. In that sterile hospital room, Adebayo felt something solidify within him, the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged, with the family he never knew he needed. Sunlight streamed through the windows of their Lago Central penthouse, where Adebayo sat on a hand-woven mat with Olufemi and Amara. 2 weeks had passed since Amara's hospital stay, and the rhythm of their life together had shifted. For the first time, Adebayo felt truly present, not just physically, but emotionally. "Look, Mama!" Olufemi exclaimed, clapping her hands as she stacked wooden blocks carved with Adinkra symbols. At 18 months old, her language skills were developing rapidly, compensating for her lack of sight. Amara laughed, her strength returning more each day. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You are as clever as the spider in the stories of Anansi." Adebayo watched them, his heart full. The board meeting he'd missed had indeed cost him the investment deal with the Niger Delta Oil Consortium, but strangely, he found he didn't mind as much as he expected. Something more important was being built here. "What are you thinking about?" Amara asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "The investor meeting," he admitted. "Missing it was the right choice, but now I need to figure out what's next for the company." "And have you?" she asked, her head tilted in curiosity. Adebayo nodded slowly. "I think so. I've been considering a new direction, starting a foundation for children with visual impairments across Nigeria. Something that could really make a difference, especially in rural areas where such children are often stigmatized." Amara's eyes widened. "Adebayo, that's wonderful. What brought this on?" "Olufemi," he said simply. "And you. I've spent my life building wealth, but what's the point if it doesn't help our community? Our ancestors believed that true wealth comes from lifting others." He reached out to touch his daughter's hair gently. "I want to create something meaningful, something that will help children like her have every opportunity." "I think that's the best idea you've ever had," Amara said, her voice warm with pride. "The elders would approve." Adebayo smiled, feeling more confident about this new venture than he had about any business deal. "Will you help me? Your perspective would be invaluable. You understand both worlds in a way I never could." "Of course," she agreed. "We're a team, remember? As they say, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together." As they worked together building block towers with Olufemi, Adebayo realized how far they'd come. From a cold business arrangement to a family bound by love and shared purpose, it was a journey he never could have predicted. Later that evening, while Olufemi slept, Adebayo and Amara sat on the balcony drinking palm wine and watching the city lights of Lagos Central shimmer in the distance. "I never thought I'd be here," Amara admitted quietly. "Not just in this apartment, but in this life, with you and Olufemi." "Neither did I," Adebayo confessed. "I thought I knew exactly what I wanted, but I had no idea what I needed." Amara reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. The gesture was simple, but intimate. "So, what now?" she asked. Adebayo turned to her, his expression serious but warm. "Now we build something together, a family, a foundation, a future, if you want that." "I do," she whispered, her eyes bright with emotion. "Our ancestors have brought us together for a purpose greater than ourselves." As the night wrapped around them, the city humming below, Adebayo felt a peace he'd never known before. The empire he'd built might change shape, but what was growing in its place was far more valuable. A legacy of love, acceptance, and purpose that would outlast any business venture. 1 year later, Adebayo stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of his hotel in Lagos Central, looking out at the crowd gathered for the launch of the Okafor Foundation for Visually Impaired Children. The room buzzed with energy. Journalists, business associates, families, and advocates all waiting to hear his speech. Traditional highlife music had welcomed guests, and the space was adorned with contemporary Nigerian art and traditional symbols representing vision and guidance. 5 years ago, Adebayo began, his voice steady, "if you had told me I'd be standing here today, I wouldn't have believed you." He spotted Amara in the front row, holding 3-year-old Olufemi on her lap. They both wore elegant outfits of matching blue and gold Ankara fabric, but it was their smiles that truly radiated. Beside them sat families with visually impaired children, the first beneficiaries of the Foundation's programs from across Nigeria. "I built my career believing that success meant wealth, power, and perfection," Adebayo continued. "I wanted an heir to continue that legacy. What I got instead was a teacher." He looked directly at Olufemi, whose face turned toward the sound of his voice. She couldn't see him, but she sensed him, smiling in his direction. "My daughter taught me that seeing doesn't always happen with your eyes. Understanding doesn't always come from calculation, and family isn't always what you expect it to be. Our ancestors knew this wisdom, but sometimes we must journey far to rediscover what they always understood." The crowd listened intently as Adebayo shared how Olufemi had changed his perspective on what truly mattered, how her challenges had inspired a new direction for his business empire. Today, the Okafor Foundation launches with a 5 billion naira endowment. We'll fund research, develop technologies, create scholarships, and build communities for visually impaired children and their families across Nigeria and West Africa. Not because these children need fixing, they don't, but because our society needs to better recognize and nurture their gifts. Applause filled the room. Adebayo caught Amara's eye, seeing tears of pride shimmering there. Amara's smile widened at the public use of her married name. They had wed in a traditional ceremony 6 months earlier, making official what their hearts had known for some time. "Baba!" Olufemi reached for him, recognizing his footsteps. He lifted her into his arms, inhaling the sweet scent of shea butter in her hair. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Olufemi was tucked safely in bed, Adebayo and Amara stood on their balcony overlooking the city. As our elders say, what an old man can see sitting down, a young man cannot see standing up. We have gained wisdom together. What had begun as a calculated business transaction had evolved into the most precious gift. A family bound by love rather than obligation. A purpose guided by compassion rather than ambition. Thank you for watching and listening to the story of Adebayo, Amara, and little Olufemi. We see how a journey that began with desperate desire ended with profound acceptance. What started as a wealthy man's quest for the perfect heir transformed into a lesson about true love and the meaning of family. In today's world, we often feel immense pressure to have children. Society, family, and cultural expectations push us toward parenthood, sometimes at any cost. We pursue this goal through traditional means, modern medicine, or unconventional arrangements, convinced that having a child will complete us. But, as Adebayo discovered, the true blessing comes not in acquiring a child as one might acquire property or assets, but in opening our hearts to love them exactly as they are. Olufemi's blindness initially seemed like an imperfection to Adebayo, a flaw in his carefully constructed plan. Yet, it became the very thing that opened his eyes to a deeper understanding of love and purpose. When children enter our lives, whether through birth, adoption, or other means, they come as they are, unique individuals with their own strengths, challenges, and destinies. Some may have disabilities or special needs. Others may develop interests or identities different from what we imagined. Each child is a person in their own right, not an extension of ourselves or a fulfillment of our ambitions. The greatest gift we can give our children is not wealth, status, or even opportunity, but unconditional acceptance and love. As Amara showed Adebayo, loving a child means seeing their true essence and celebrating their unique way of experiencing the world. Remember that children are not projects to perfect or vessels for our unfulfilled dreams. They are fellow travelers on life's journey, entrusted to our care, but ultimately following their own path. Our role is not to shape them to our specifications, but to guide them toward becoming their most authentic selves. Thank you for joining us for this story of transformation and love. We hope it has touched your heart and perhaps offered a new perspective on the precious gift of parenthood. Remember Adebayo's journey when you face your own challenges and choices. Sometimes what seems like disappointment may actually be the doorway to your greatest blessing. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. Leave us a comment on where you are watching from. Subscribe and like for more stories like this that explore the human heart and the universal experiences that connect us all.